Hey everybody, it's Shizug and welcome back to this meta update. Today we are going over the December 6th, 2024 patch for Deadlock, and we're going to get right into it. This time we're going to have a little bit different format. We're going to go over more things than we typically go over, but we're still going to have all of the same high level changes that we would expect from a normal Shizug meta update. Alright, getting into things. First off, we have some beautiful new map changes which we've been seeing in the background. The purple lane is now truly the park lane. The first thing to talk about is a new hero to Hero Labs, Raven. Raven's playstyle is to impede enemy movement, punish players that look at him during his ultimate, and capitalize on that by doing extra damage to heroes who have turned away and is shooting in the back. Raven currently has 3 different unique abilities: Blindside, which reduces someone's turn rate and also gives that additional backstab damage; Umbrella Maneuver, which launches you in a certain direction and gives you a sort of Talon arrow-like projectile that you can shoot back down at the ground; and Revelation, which causes enemies that look at you to get cursed, and everyone in Revelation's radius is taking damage per second of 50. Raven's temporary ability is full auto and gains fire rate. His current kit kind of feels like it lacks ammo. He has a pretty slow firing gun that only has 9 ammo right now, but I'm excited to see where people take this build, and I think that building around the ult and showing up to team fights is probably the best way to utilize Raven right now. He can't really effectively shove waves, but he can team fight excellently. Next, we have a couple matchmaking changes. The first is that there is now a try-hard queue, as I would call it. They've added an extra competitive option to allow players to control what type of players are placed on their team. If you want to have high levels of coordination, communication, competitiveness instead of a chill, relaxed vibe, you can optionally choose that in the menu now. You can now go up to the queue options and check off extra competitive, where you'll have like-minded teammates on your team. Valve notes that this will sometimes be disabled if there are not a lot of people queuing at the time. It'll give you whoever, but it's an option for those peak times. Additionally, the matchmaker will now try to prioritize each team having at least 2 frontliners when it has the option to do so. So although we don't have a draft yet to pick our heroes as we load into game one at a time, we're at least going to try to have some better randomly generated drafts in the first place. The matchmaker's going to have a little bit of spice that gives us a more well-rounded team comp for going forward. All right, getting into the more important miscellaneous changes, something that we see is ability range stat and ability duration stat now both have diminishing stacking. So someone in my chat asked, what does that diminishing stacking really mean? Essentially, those builds that we saw in the past, like the Ivy Kudzu build, the 7 Ball build, those builds that relied on stacking multiple things that gave extra range or duration, they are now going to be less effective. If you have 2 items that buff your range by, say, 8%, and you have them together, before what we had was additive stacking, where those 2 8s would add up to 16, and you would have 16% extra range on your spells. But now we're going to see that diminish. We're not going to see that have the full effectiveness. We're going to have a multiplicative or kind of logarithmic relationship between how those items add together. So now, instead of it being 8 plus 8, you'll maybe have somewhere around like 12 or a diminishing return on stacking those items. These 2 changes are going to hurt heroes like Pocket, Dynamo, Ivy, and 7. They're going to make it less effective for those heroes to build around buffing that one certain spell that they think was going to give them the most advantage. This is probably healthy for the game, and down in the item patch notes, we actually get to see that a lot of items actually lose cooldown reduction as well. That's another item category that isn't called out explicitly here, but it's a trend that's noted in the item changelog that either cooldown reduction was reduced or entirely removed from some items. All right, moving forward, heroes now have a built-in 0.5 sprint across the board. And then because of that, sprint boots and enduring speed have both lost 0.5 sprint stats from their item. This is going to even the playing field between heroes that have naturally high movement and some of the slower heroes as well. Now, every hero is going to have sprint stats when some didn't even start with it in the first place. This is still kind of the echoes and rippling of these 2 sprint boots and enduring speed being good items from when the map got stretched apart. I think a lot of movement in this game can really be solved with zipline momentum conservation, but I think that this is going to help out a lot of players that don't have advanced movement, and it's going to make it more accessible for them. Talking about sprint speed and move speed, the new change is that carrying the urn now sets and limits your move speed to a fixed 13, and this includes things like Ivy's airdrop. It no longer provides sprint, and the speed cannot be reduced or increased. So what this means is that no matter what, if you're holding the urn, your move speed is 13. This is a buff for some heroes. This is a huge buff for some heroes like Infernus, who was really slow and didn't have a natural way to deliver the urn. This is a massive nerf for heroes like Ivy and Haze, who had these natural move speed amplifiers that could help them deliver the urn more effectively. Now, every hero is going to have the equal opportunity to deliver the urn at the same rate. that fixed 13 move speed cannot be reduced or increased. So slow heroes got buffed on this and fast heroes got nerfed. Additionally, talking about the Urn spawn point now alternates between the left and the right, starting with the left rather than being random. So before, what we had was the 10-minute marker happens, the urn spawns, the buffs come down, people play for the buffs, and randomly, one side or the other got the urn. Now it's going to be consistent and predictable. So one buff is going to have more value as it spawns with the urn and allows people to kind of segue that into a nice delivery. This kind of 50-50 random guess game wasn't really the healthiest for the game, and I'm glad to see that there's going to be consistency for people to make coordinated plays around. I'm happy about these urn changes, and I think it's going to be healthy for the game in the long run. Next, we see a lot of changes with the Patron HP and how it scales. What we see is that the default Patron HP has been reduced from 10k to 7.5k before it's been knocked down, and then the downed Patron goes from 18k to 13.5k. And then both of these health pools grow by either 250 health per minute, starting at 20 minutes for the normal Patron, and the down Patron grows at 450 per minute, starting at 20 minutes. And Valve notes that overall, there's going to be 25% less HP at 20 minutes, no change at 30 minutes, and it's going to be 25% more HP at 40 minutes. I noticed that in a lot of my games, that downed Patron really was a make or break point. Some teams really had issues pushing it if they were on a complete tear in the early game. So I think that this is going to be making it a lot more easy for absolute stomps to end a little bit easier and more predictably, and those late games aren't going to end in a flash like we were seeing recently. I'm curious to see how this will play out, and I'm kind of wondering what it's going to feel like in game to have these weaker patrons or stronger patrons. I would like to see a more clear health bar where we could see the actual number that the patron has of health. I think right now it's a little hard to gauge how strong or not it is unless you know this table of 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. So I'm kind of curious to see what that would look like. But overall, if a game's a stomp, it's going to end a little bit sooner. And if a game's even, it's going to go a little bit later. Next, they added a tick-based souls system that gives the bottom 2 net worth players on the team a small amount of souls per second. The amount of souls available to distribute between the bottom 2 players is based on the souls gathered by your own team, 2 and 1% respectively, for the bottom player and the second bottom player. This occurs only after the laning phase. So what this means is that if you're down and out, you're going to be getting free souls now. If you're looking at the net worth and you're saying, damn, I have 14k, everyone else on my team has 20k, just know that all the souls that they're earning, if that 7 is turbo farming the jungle, he's still going to get most of the souls, but you're also going to be rewarded for other people taking souls on the map. This isn't going to reduce the amount of souls that turbo farming 7 is going to get. He's still going to get the same amount, but because he's farming, you're going to get rewarded with a portion of what he's taking in. This is more soul duplication, and I'm not really sure how I feel about it, but I think it's going to make the game feel a lot more nice for a little bit more imbalanced games. It's going to keep those players that were maybe not holding up in terms of net worth, they're going to stay in it, and also that economic support that we're kind of afraid of in old MOBAs is not going to be as rough in this one as well. Those players who are playing kind of sacrificially and kind of scouting for kills, they're going to get rewarded for that playstyle. They're not going to be the richest hero on the team by any mean, but they're absolutely not going to fall behind in net worth now. There's a really large section on soul soaking that's been reworked, and Valve undid some of the changes from last patch to mitigate it. I'm not going to put the whole giant paragraph here, but essentially what you need to know is if you were soul soaking, it's not going to work as much anymore. Essentially, once you take a wave, you're going to be flagged as a quote-unquote low-value player, and when you go to another wave that spawned on the same minute, you're not going to collect souls from it as you would before. So this way, if you rotate to another lane, you're not going to necessarily grief that lane, you're not going to absorb souls that aren't really yours to take in the first place, but you're not going to gain anything unless you go there and get kills and participate somehow. Simply showing up isn't going to get you any kind of benefit unless you stick around for an extra wave that you didn't farm on that minute in your other lane. For 99% of the player base, you're not going to need to know this, but it's important to understand for competitive play that soul soaking, that kind of bouncing between waves and doubling up on farm, isn't going to be effective anymore. The thing that the 99% of the player base does care about is that Valve has undone some of the mitigation they've put in for soul soaking in the past because of this new change. They reverted the facts that Guardians now deal 25% more damage to troopers, Guardians now take 25% more damage from troopers and players, the range to be considered for souls reduced by 5 meters, and troopers now do 20% more damage to each other. Those 4 changelogs have been undone and are no longer in the game. Part of me kind of liked that they were in the game. I kind of liked how it felt more punishing to actually kill an opponent. I felt like if I could kill the troopers and get them under the Guardian, it would deny souls from the opponent and I would get some good damage in. So I kind of wish that some of these changes stayed, but I'm okay to see where Valve takes it with the direction of the game, and maybe they don't want the laning phase to be as punishing if you have a death. Alright, speedrunning the items category. Across the board, we saw nerfs to tier 1 weapon items. We had small numerical changes to almost every single one of them that makes the item slightly worse across the board. From the tier 2 weapon category, Berserker now builds into Frenzy. This is really good because I feel like Frenzy and Berserker were kind of typically bought together, and a lot of the time people who are buying Berserker were going to buy Frenzy later anyway, and I think that this really adds a synergy and slot compression to the item of Berserker and Frenzy. It does make Frenzy more expensive, so if you were only buying Frenzy, this is definitely a nerf to the item. But if you were a hero that was buying Berserker and Frenzy, I think of Lashes, Shivs, it is absolutely a buff to that item. You're going to be able to use 2 weapon slots in one and get the full benefit of Berserker on Frenzy. For Spellslinger headshots, the proc bonus has been changed from 3% Spirit Power to 3% Spirit Amp. This is going to make sure that you're consistently dealing more spirit damage and not maybe gaining more spirit power, which is maybe going to make you deal more damage. It is absolutely going to buff your raw spirit damage output. This is a buff for Spellslinger headshots. This is a weird take that some people might disagree with. Sharpshooter has been getting some pretty interesting changes patch over patch to the point where I think it might be getting viable soon. We see that weapon damage went up 10% by default, but then also the far range weapon damage has went from 50% to 70%. For heroes that position themselves far away and really focus on this like spacing focused kind of build, think like Vindictas, Talons, they're going to benefit a lot from Sharpshooter if they choose to pick it up. I think that this item has got buffed patch over patch over patch, and I think it deserves some tinkering with on this one. I think that in my mind, I definitely want to try out Sharpshooter and see how it feels. Is it going to be meta defining and game breaking? Who knows? But I think it's worth kind of noting here as a unique item that they're tinkering with, and I think you should fiddle with it. Crippling Headshots debuff now stacks with multiple people. So if you have 2 crippling headshots on your team, what used to happen is if they both headshot someone, there would still just be the 24% reduction in stats that would be there by default. And it didn't matter there was 2 people, they would just refresh the same cooldown, and there was no benefit of having 2 crippling headshots. Now they'll stack diminishingly, so now one person will apply a 24% debuff, and then the next will diminishingly be a 12%, adding up to a 36% debuff. Spiritual Overflow's cooldown reduction went from 15% to 12%, and just about every item that has cooldown reduction, I'm not going to call out from here on out, because they all got gutted. Every single cooldown reduction item, except for I think improved cooldown, took some pretty big nerfs. So if you were buying these weird one-off items to get CDR, it's not going to really be a big thing anymore. Veilwalker got some nerfs. While shot while invisible, you require 1 second to go back invisible rather than 0.25 seconds. And then the cooldown on Veilwalker itself went up by 4 seconds as well. This was really annoying to try to chase down someone who went through a Veilwalker. Once you barely just found them and shot them, they would go right back invis if you had to reload or something like that, and you'd be able to lose track of them pretty easily. Now that 1 second timer is going to give you a larger window to kind of visually track where they go, and it's going to be less abusable. Valve undid the Majestic Leap nerf that we saw in a previous patch. It no longer gets interrupted on slam down if you get shot. This is a big win for Majestic Leap, and I do feel like I've been missing seeing it, so this would be a big change to make this item a little bit more viable again. Leech lost its cooldown reduction and now upgrades from Healbane. So Leech is now more expensive. As we saw with Frenzy and Berserker, we have that slot compression of 2 green items that have 2 different benefits for them. Leech and Healbane are now going to do the same thing. You can buy Healbane, get the full benefits of it, and now you're going to have 2 items in one, but Leech is going to be more expensive because of this extra component. Ethereal Shift now allows you to float around slowly at 2 meters per second when in the Ethereal Shift. This might let you get around a small corner or something like that, but you don't get to go very far while Ethereal shifted. Alright, time to talk about heroes. I'm going to go over the ones that I feel like had significant changes and kind of skip over the ones where it's small tweaks, and we're really going to focus on the big changes. Dynamo got some pretty heavy nerfs with a longer Singularity cooldown, and Singularity is now going to deal half of its normal damage to objectives. If you didn't know, that final Patron pit fight was really good for Dynamo because he could sit on top of it, Singularity it, and deal percentage-based damage to the actual Patron itself. you could end up doing a really significant amount of damage with just Singularity, not even to mention the benefits you'd have from having a large disable in the center of the pit. Grey Talon got some really funky changes. His immobilizing trap, which became the immobilizing tether, has now been renamed to Spirit Snare. The Spirit Snare, instead of tethering or disabling people, now applies a curse debuff for 1.75 seconds for all enemies in the radius when it triggers instead of that tether. Additionally, you can now shoot a charge shot onto a Spirit Snare center to trigger it to detonate immediately in a 30% increased radius. So what this means is a Talon can now throw down a Spirit Snare. You might not be in range of it, but now they can charge shot down on top of that snare and apply that curse debuff if you're even outside of it by just a small margin. I'm really curious to see what the Grey Talon specialists do with this, and I'm really excited to see the tech that comes out of it. Haze across the board saw number nerfs, so just about everything that you think was strong about her got a little bit worse across the board. When you get sleep daggered, you can now still move a little bit at 2 meters per second, just like our ethereal shift from earlier. You're not able to act, like take actions like mantle, parry, use stamina, and you still wake up, but it's going to let you maybe move around a corner a little bit instead. But Haze did see numerical changes across the board that's going to make her just a little bit weaker in every aspect. Now this change I'm really excited about. Infernus's Flame Dash Tier 3 now also makes the ability charged, where instead of having one Flame Dash and you can use only that one Flame Dash for the entire fight, you can now buy an item that's going to give you more charges and use it multiple times in that single fight. This is going to cause some really wacky builds on Infernus. You're going to see a lot of deviation from the typical Infernus build that we've seen basically the entire time that we've seen Deadlock. We're going to see a lot more focus on the Flame Dash to be able to use those charges, maybe even farm around it, fight around it, things like that. Additionally, Infernus got some better cooldowns on that Flame Dash with this buff. Geist got some big changes. Now, instead of having a silence on her life drain, she's now going to have it on her Soul Exchange Tier 3. When she Soul Exchanges, when she ults, she's now going to silence people in a 15-meter radius for 3 seconds. And now, the life drain, which used to silence in the past, is now going to have charges as well, just like we talked about with Infernus. So you can actually life drain multiple people at once and continuously heal if you're in a bad situation in like a 1v2, 1v3. You can actually maybe turn situations like that around. So I know people really didn't like McGinnis's mini turrets. They no longer have that 33 per second HP buffer. Now, no matter what, turrets will live for 4 seconds, but you can visually see if you've done the damage to them in those first 4 seconds, no matter what. You can mark a turret for death immediately. You can see that it will die after its lifetime of 4 seconds. However, that doesn't mean that turrets only live for 4 seconds. They can live as long as their typical lives if they're not shot. It just makes it more intuitive to know if you've killed a turret or not. Pocket has a pretty large changelog, but overall what you need to know is that there's a lot of numerical nerfs. But what you need to know is that Affliction now is going to immediately deal 18% of your current HP, which has a talent as well, so that could be more later in the game, and it's going to have less Affliction DPS as time goes on. So you're not going to have this large ticking kind of DPS lingering on you, but you're going to take a big burst and then have a smaller ticking after the fact. However, the Affliction radius has went from 14 meters to 9 meters instead. It is drastically smaller at level 1, but they give this back to Pocket when Affliction has been maxed. You get the same large Affliction that we used to be used to, but the Affliction radius at level 1, those early like tower diving ult, this tower diving ult is going to be a lot harder to land in the early game. It's not going to be nearly as easy. When 7 is storm clouding, he now gets a secondary ability called Lightning Strike. Essentially, you call down a lightning strike and it's going to displace people from wherever you cast it. It's going to knock them away from that radius and deal some extra damage. This is going to let you take people out of cover so you can deal more damage in your Stormcloud. You can use this fully while you're channeling, and it is synergistic with Stormcloud itself. Also, in Stormcloud, similar to Ethereal Shift, similar to Haze's move speed, you can actually very slowly move around. So if there's someone that's behind cover that you're barely not able to hit them in, you can move yourself to try to get on top of that cover and make it not as effective. Warden's last stand resistance has been reduced from 60% to 30%. And he's going to get that resistance back with his tier 3, where he gets 50% back when it's maxed out. But this is going to make it a lot harder for Warden to dive towers early. That was kind of like the playstyle before, is a Warden would show up to a lane, he'd last stand and just dive a tower and just take 60% less damage across the board from every type of damage. Now it's going to be a lot weaker early game, but it will be stronger later. And lastly, Wraith's lift is now entirely different. Instead of being a lift that holds you in the air and just lets a Wraith headshot you kind of mindlessly, it's going to lift you and then immediately slam you into the ground, but it's going to disarm you and silence you for 2.5 seconds. The projectile is going to be a little bit quicker and the cast time's faster, so it's going to be a little bit more reactive, but there's now more counterplay to telekinesis instead of just like, oh, I guess I'm dying, or I need to have an item around this. And also her full auto, her spirit damage that comes with full auto is now going to have better spirit scaling as well. All right, everybody, that was a lot. Let me know if you like this new format, if you'd like me to go over all these changes, and if it's worthwhile to do that. Or would you just prefer the more focused metagame changes that you want to just understand quickly instead of seeing all of the different various important changes in the game? Let me know what you think. Definitely want to hear your opinions on it, and I'll take it into account for the next patch update video. And remember, guys, if you want to see every single thought I have on every single line, if you are mad that I didn't talk about Viscus's Puddle Punch, if you check out my VOD on either YouTube or Twitch, I go live every, what is typically Thursday, but this time Friday, and I talk about every single line one by one in this patch. So if you want to hear about a specific hero that I didn't talk about and my thoughts on it, I probably talked for like 5 or 10 minutes on that VOD, and you can go check that out there. All right, everybody, thanks for making it to the end. Have a good one.